90 fathers, mothers, and teenagers just clocked in for their morning shift. They think they're here to process chicken for a paycheck, but they've unknowingly entered a structure engineered to trap, not release. Behind them, the doors have just been padlocked from the outside. They have no idea that in minutes, the very air they breathe will become their executioner. Above them, a single hydraulic line holds 3,000 pounds of pressure, and no inspector has ever checked it. Before the fire, before the smoke, there is only the architecture. Study it. The building has no windows facing the production floor. A deliberate choice made for temperature control and food safety that leaves 90 human beings without a single sightline to the outside world. Brick on all sides. One story. A layout that folds back on itself in corridors of steel conveyor belts, refrigerated lockers, and processing stations so that a person standing at the center of the plant cannot see either end of it. This is Imperial Food Products in Hamlet, North Carolina. And on this morning in September of 1991, it is functioning exactly as designed. Here's the detail that matters. Somewhere in this building, likely near a loading area or a rear processing bay, a steel fire door sits in its frame with a padlock threaded through the exterior hasp, not a broken lock, not a maintenance oversight. A padlock placed there deliberately by management instruction and checked because company procedure required it to be checked. The reasoning behind it is almost banal. Workers were, according to plant management, walking out with product. Chicken tenders, frozen nuggets, small thefts, the kind that happen in any food processing operation where employees handle product all day and go home hungry. The solution management settled on was not cameras, not searches at the exit. The solution was to remove the exit itself as an option, to padlock the doors from the outside and route all foot traffic through a single monitored point. Sit with that logic for a second. A frozen chicken tender, valued at a few cents, was treated as a greater operational threat than an unblocked path to survival. 90 employees do not know this equation exists. They know their shift, they know the smell of raw poultry and the hum of the line. Most are local residents of Hamlet and the surrounding Richmond County. Mothers, fathers, some barely out of high school, earning close to minimum wage for repetitive, physically punishing work under fluorescent light that never changes with the hour outside, because there is no window to tell them what hour it is. People like the young mother working the fryer line to buy school supplies, or the man nearing retirement who knew every bolt in the machine but didn't know the one above his head was about to snap. They move through their stations, deboning, battering, frying, packaging, each task calibrated to a production quota, each worker several feet from the next, separated by machinery, noise, and the particular isolation of factory labor. If something goes wrong on one side of this building, a person on the other side will not hear it, not immediately. The layout was never built with escape in mind. It was built for throughput. When a building is designed to contain product rather than protect people, the results are written in the forensic record. If you value these deep dives into the evidence of history, consider subscribing to Forensic Protocol so you don't miss our next case. Now, the part that turns architecture into forensic evidence. This plant had operated for 11 years. 11 years of processing lines, hydraulic systems, gas-fired fryers, pressurized equipment, all of it running, continuously, inside a sealed brick shell. And in 11 years, it had never once been inspected by state safety officials. Let that register. Not rarely inspected, not overdue for inspection. Never. No state safety inspector had walked this floor, tested this equipment, or verified this building's fire exits in over a decade of active industrial operation. The absence isn't a footnote. It is the entire mechanism by which failure became inevitable rather than unlucky. While bureaucrats in offices miles away forgot this building existed, the workers inside were noticing the heat, a small drip of oil here, a strange hum there. They reported it, but in a windowless room, your voice only goes as far as the person next to you. Think about what that means mechanically. Hydraulic lines degrade, seals fatigue, pressure fittings loosened by fractions of a millimeter over thousands of cycles. In a properly inspected facility, that kind of degradation gets caught. A technician walks the line, checks pressure ratings, replaces a worn fitting before it becomes a failure point. Here, there was no technician walking that line with regulatory authority behind them. There was only time, pressure, and heat operating on machinery that no external authority had ever verified. 11 years without inspection doesn't guarantee catastrophe on any single day, but it does something worse than guarantee it. It makes catastrophe a matter of when, not if. Every additional month of operation without oversight was another month where a failing component could go unnoticed, another month where the padlocked doors sat unchallenged as an acceptable risk. This is the environment 90 people walked into that morning. A sealed brick container, doors bolted from the outside, running unsupervised industrial equipment for over a decade. Not one of them can see the pressure gauge above the fryer line. Not one of them knows that the hydraulic system feeding it has never been evaluated by anyone outside the company itself. The system doesn't announce its own risk, it simply holds. The way any system holds, right up until the moment the load exceeds what it was built to withstand. And somewhere above the fryers, that moment is already approaching. A component under 3,000 pounds of pressure, untested, unwatched, is about to reach the exact threshold where hydraulic engineering stops being theoretical and starts becoming consequence. Physics does not negotiate. It does not wait for a convenient hour, or spare a line because the shift has just begun. At some point that morning, in the space above the fryer bank, a fitting under 3,000 pounds of pressure finally exceeds its tolerance. Metal that has flexed silently for 11 years reaches its limit and gives. The rupture itself lasts less than a second, but inside that second is a cascade any forensic engineer would recognize instantly. Technical review of the incident places the failure threshold for a line of this kind between 800 and 1,500 pounds per square inch before atomization begins, the point where hydraulic fluid stops behaving like a liquid and starts behaving like a weapon. At 3,000 pounds of pressure, the fluid doesn't simply leak. It sprays. It atomizes into a fine invisible mist launched directly into open space above a bank of gas-fired burners. Here is the mechanism. Stripped of drama, hydraulic fluid, like most industrial oils, has a flash point, a temperature at which its vapor will ignite given an ignition source. Atomization dramatically lowers the effective threshold for that ignition because it multiplies the surface area of the fluid exposed to heat almost instantly. A pool of oil resists ignition. A fine aerosol of the same oil, suspended in air above an open flame, does not. This is basic fluid dynamics, and it is also, in this specific building, a lethal certainty waiting for its trigger. The open gas flames beneath the fryer line are that trigger. There is a detail here that rarely makes it into the retelling, and it deserves to be said plainly. The hydraulic fluid Imperial Foods used in that system was a standard petroleum-based fluid, cheaper, more available, and significantly more flammable than the fire-resistant alternatives already common in industrial food processing at the time. That choice was not dictated by necessity. It was dictated by cost. A safer fluid existed. It was not used here. So when the atomized spray meets the flame front, there is no delay, no smolder, no slow catch. There is instantaneous combustion, a fireball that expands outward from the fryer line at a speed the human eye cannot track as a sequence of events. It registers only as a single, total transformation of the room. Let that sit for a moment. 1 second, the factory floor is a place of routine. Conveyor belts, fluorescent light, the low mechanical hum of processing equipment. The next second, it is something else entirely, a structure fire, fully involved in a space with no windows to vent it. This is where the building's own geometry turns against the people inside it. Windowless construction, engineered originally to control temperature and contain product odor, now performs a second, unintended function. It contains the fire's byproducts as efficiently as it once contained cold air. Heat has nowhere to escape. Neither does what comes next. Combustion inside an enclosed space produces smoke that is chemically distinct from what most people picture when they hear the word. This is not grey haze drifting lazily toward a vent. This is a suspension of unburned hydrocarbons, soot particulate, and, critically, carbon monoxide generated by insulation and animal fat burning in an oxygen-starved environment. Within the sealed volume of that plant, concentrations climb toward what toxicologists would classify as a lethal concentration in a matter of minutes, not hours. The electrical system fails next, and this detail matters more than it first appears to. Heat this intense compromises wiring almost immediately, and when it does, the lights go with it. In a windowless building, there is no ambient light to fall back on, no dusk, no gradual dimming for the eyes to adjust to. Imagine the transition. One moment the harsh glare of industrial bulbs, the next a darkness so thick you can feel it against your skin, a void smelling of burnt oil and terror where the only way to find an exit is to crawl through the soot. Consider the differential pressure at work inside that room now. Heat rises. Smoke, driven by that same thermal buoyancy, banks along the ceiling first, forming a toxic layer that thickens and descends, foot by foot, toward the floor. For a short window, the air nearest the ground remains marginally more breathable than the air above it. It is a narrow, shrinking margin, and it is the only one available to anyone still standing upright. 90 people are inside this building. None of them designed this failure. None of them installed this hydraulic line, chose this fluid, or decided this factory would run 11 years without independent inspection. They are, in this instant, only reacting, dropping, coughing, groping through smoke that has erased the room they knew seconds earlier, Somewhere in that darkness, muscle memory turns toward the nearest marked exit. It is the only response available to a body that cannot see. It assumes, reasonably, that an exit will open. The body drops before the mind decides to. That is the first thing worth understanding about what happens next. This is not panic in the cinematic sense, nor screaming and flailing. It is a nervous system executing a survival program written over millions of years. Get low, find air, move toward light or memory of light. Dozens of workers are now on their hands and knees crawling through a floor plan they knew by heart an hour ago and cannot recognize at all now. The maze does the rest. Conveyor belts that guided chicken parts all morning now guide nothing. They are obstacles, low steel ridges in total darkness, catching hands and knees and shins. Cooling units, packaging stations, support columns, every fixed object in that windowless grid becomes a hazard when the person navigating it cannot see 3 inches in front of their own face. Some workers crawl in circles without realizing it. Some reach dead ends they mistake for progress, and the smoke keeps descending. This is where the science stops being abstract and becomes personal. One worker at a time, carbon monoxide does not simply irritate the lungs, it binds to hemoglobin with roughly 200 times the affinity of oxygen, occupying the exact molecular seat oxygen needs to reach the brain and heart. The forensic term for what follows is cellular starvation, not suffocation from a lack of air pressure. Starvation at the cellular level, while the lungs are still moving, still working, still doing their job, just delivering a poison instead of a solution. Coughing becomes violent, then involuntary, then counterproductive, because every gasp for clean air pulls in more of the exact gas doing the damage. Somewhere in this crawling, choking dark, groups of workers begin converging on the same points. The marked exits, the ones every fire drill, had there been one, would have designated as salvation. They reach the doors by feel, by memory, by the desperate logic that a door is supposed to open. It does not. The steel resists. Fingers search for a handle, a bar, a mechanism, anything that yields. There is only the immovable weight of a padlock, threaded through a hasp, exactly where it was threaded that morning, exactly where it has been threaded for years. The rule that governed chicken nuggets now governs human beings. What follows are minutes that forensic reconstruction can only partially describe, because no instrument recorded them. Only the doors themselves, afterward. Bodies press forward, fists strike steel. Shoulders drive into a surface that does not flex, does not give, does not care. Somewhere behind that first layer of desperate hands, more workers arrive, adding their weight to a crowd pushing toward an exit that has already failed everyone at its front. This is not one person's failed attempt. It is dozens, layered, compounding, each new arrival unaware the door ahead has already been tested and found immovable. Screams occur here. They are muffled almost instantly, swallowed by brick walls built for containment, not acoustics, and by throats already raw from smoke. Outside, in the parking lot and the street beyond, almost nothing of this is audible. The building does exactly what it was engineered to do. It contains, and the smoke layer keeps its slow, patient descent. Investigators working the scene later would document something the fire itself could never testify to directly: scuff marks and footprints on the interior face of those doors, some found as high as 6 feet from the floor. Sit with that measurement for a moment. 6 feet is not the mark of someone standing and pushing. 6 feet is the mark of someone being climbed. A body used as leverage, a shoulder used as a foothold, human beings stacking against each other in absolute darkness, trying to reach some imagined pocket of air near a doorframe that would never open regardless of how high anyone climbed. It is the forensic record of desperation with nowhere left to go, written not in testimony, but in the physical residue left on painted steel. By this point, the differential pressure that once offered a narrow margin near the floor has collapsed. The toxic layer has completed its descent. There is no more marginally breathable air to find, no lower position left to drop into. The mechanism that began as an uninspected hydraulic line and a preventable rupture has completed its function exactly as physics dictated it would, methodically, indifferently, and without a single moving part designed to stop it. The building, for a period lasting minutes that would feel far longer to anyone inside it, holds 90 people inside a sealed volume with a shrinking margin of air and immovable steel between them and the outside world. The circular saw arrives before the ambulances do any good. Firefighters, working from the exterior, cut through padlock after padlock, the hasps engineered to keep a body inside performing exactly as poorly against a steel blade as they performed well against a human shoulder. Metal gives. The doors swing open onto something that photographs cannot fully translate, and testimony would later struggle to describe without breaking. 25 bodies, piled at the exits, in positions that tell their own story without need of narration, Limbs interlocked, faces angled toward the thin cracks around the door frames, toward whatever trace of exterior air might have been leaking through a gap never meant to admit anything. That positioning is not incidental. It is the last recorded decision each of those 25 people made, and it was the correct one. It simply arrived seconds or minutes too late. 54 more are pulled out alive, many of them unconscious, most of them requiring immediate treatment for smoke inhalation and burns severe enough to require hospitalization for weeks afterward. Investigators move in behind the firefighters. Their job is slower, colder, and in its own way just as forensic as an autopsy. Charles Jeffress, Assistant Commissioner of the North Carolina Labor Department, becomes one of the officials tasked with reconstructing exactly how a building this size could fail, this completely, this quickly. Tim Bradley, a state deputy commissioner, is among those who confirm publicly what the scuff marks already suggested, that exits were locked, that others were obstructed, and that the building's design left almost no redundancy once the primary path out had failed. The final tally of violations is not a handful of oversights. It is 83 separate and serious safety infractions, documented one by one across a facility that had operated for over a decade without ever undergoing a state safety inspection. Missing sprinkler systems, missing heat detection, a hydraulic line running at pressure levels for which no maintenance record exists. Each violation on its own might have been survivable. Stacked together, they form what investigators would eventually classify as a systemic failure. Not one broken part, but an entire architecture of neglect. $808,150. That is the number attached to those 83 violations once the fines are calculated. A number that will strike almost everyone who hears it as absurdly, obscenely small, set against 25 dead and 54 injured. It is not a judgment on the value of those lives. It is simply what the regulatory framework of the time allowed, and its inadequacy becomes in the months that follow, part of the story itself. Because criminal charges follow where regulatory fines cannot reach far enough. Emmett Rowe, the plant's owner, faces prosecution directly tied to those padlocked doors. The decision to lock them, the decade of silence in which no inspector ever walked the floor to notice. The conviction that results is, for its era, unprecedented. Corporate owners are rarely held criminally accountable for workplace deaths in this period. Rowe is sentenced to nearly 20 years in prison, a sentence length almost without precedent for an OSHA-related case at the time. A marker that a locked door and a stolen box of chicken nuggets could carry the same legal weight, in the eyes of a court, as a knife or a gun. None of that legal reckoning changes what the forensic record already shows. Every one of those 25 death certificates lists the same underlying mechanism. Not burns, not blunt trauma, asphyxiation, due to acute carbon monoxide poisoning and smoke inhalation, a slow, chemical extinguishing of consciousness that began the moment differential pressure pushed toxic air down to floor level, and ended only when there was no oxygen left in the blood to sustain a single additional heartbeat. Cellular starvation. That is the clinical term for what happens in a body deprived of usable oxygen long enough. It is not dramatic, it does not require flame contact, it requires only time, confinement, and a door that will not open. 25 people, locked inside a system built to contain product, and found, in the end, contained by it completely. The locked doors of Hamlet were a man-made trap, but sometimes the earth itself creates the prison. To see how a different kind of architecture failed, watch how one man survived 65 hours buried in Australia's deadliest landslide here, or explore our full investigation playlist. The record is still being written,